"I'm sorry, restaurant policy doesn't allow that." The hostess said it to a woman with 2 kids and $11 who had asked whether her son and daughter could split one plate. It was a lie. "Not a mistake," Eli said smoothly with a small apologetic smile at 12:41 on a Tuesday afternoon. And standing 8 feet away holding a laminated index card he'd carried in his wallet for 11 years was the man who had written the actual policy. He'd written it in his wife's handwriting because it was his wife's handwriting. She'd printed it on a 3x5 card 2 months before she died, and it said the exact opposite of what the hostess had just said. And for 11 years, it had hung framed by the kitchen door where every employee walked past it 40 times a shift. Somebody had taken it down. He'd noticed that at 11:52. Daniel Carter did not raise his voice. He did not announce himself. He watched a mother apologize for asking take her children's hands and turn toward the door, and he looked up at the clock over the pass because he had come here at 11:40 that morning for a very specific reason, and he had until 3 o'clock. At 3 o'clock in a conference room 9 blocks away, Daniel Carter was scheduled to sign the papers that would hand this restaurant, all 3 of them, to someone else. He signed nothing that day. What he did instead 41 minutes later put a small silver key on a hostess stand, ended 2 careers before the dinner rush, and made a district manager say the sentence that finished her out loud in front of 11 customers and a phone that was still recording. This is the story of a table, and the reason it costs so much is not the reason you think. For 11 years, the most important object at Carter's Grill was a 3x5 index card in a $5 frame. Sarah Carter wrote it in a hospital bed in the spring in blue ballpoint in handwriting that had gotten shakier than she wanted anyone to notice. She was 39. She had maybe 9 weeks left, and she spent one of her good afternoons on this because she had decided that if Daniel was ever actually going to build the place they'd talked about, he was going to need one rule he could not talk himself out of on a bad quarter. The card said, "The house rule. No one gets a smaller welcome than the person before them. Not for the shoes, not for the car, not for the check. Everybody eats, everybody sits down, SC." That was it. 6 lines. She'd made him read it out loud back to her, and then she'd made him promise that when he opened the doors, the card went on the wall where the staff would see it, not where the customers would, because customers don't need convincing, Danny. Staff do. On a bad Tuesday, staff do. Daniel had promised. He'd been 32 and broke, in a way that isn't a figure of speech. He was working construction from 6 to 3, delivery from 4 to 10, and an office cleaning contract from 11 to 2 in the morning, sleeping in 90-minute pieces with a 6-year-old named Emma, who had already learned not to ask where he was. He remembers exactly one meal from that year, and it is the reason this whole story exists. They were 3 days from payday in a diner on Ashland, and he had $4 and change. He ordered 1 plate of burger and fries and told the waitress he'd already eaten. Then he sat across from his daughter and made a great show of not being hungry while she ate a burger cut in half on a saucer. She was 6, she noticed anyway. Halfway through, without a word, she pushed the saucer with the other half across the table, and she was too young to have any idea what she'd just done to him. The waitress, an older woman with a bad hip whose name Daniel never learned, and he has spent 11 years being sorry about that, came back with a second plate he hadn't ordered and set it down and said, "Kitchen made a mistake. Somebody's got to eat it." Then she walked off before he could argue. That's it. That's the origin of Carter's Grill. Not the food truck, not the diner, not the 3 locations. A woman in an apron who decided that a man's dignity was worth a burger she'd probably pay for out of her own tips. Sarah died 14 months later. The food truck came the year after that out of a settlement and a second mortgage, and a level of stubbornness that Daniel would later describe as not courage, I just didn't have another idea. The truck became a diner on Ashland 6 blocks from where they'd shared a plate. The diner became a restaurant. The restaurant became 3. And in the kitchen doorway of each one at eye level hung a photocopy of a 3x5 index card in blue ballpoint. Daniel Carter was 43 now, and he had gotten very good at not being noticed. That was deliberate, and it wasn't humility exactly, it was a tool. He'd figured out early that the second the staff knows the owner is in the room performs. You don't learn anything about a restaurant by walking in as the owner. You learn everything by walking in as a guy in a faded shirt with a truck outside. So there were no photos of him on the walls. His name was on the paperwork and nowhere else. New hires met a maintenance guy named Dan, who fixed the ice machine and asked how their shift was going, and half of them worked there a year before anybody told them. He drove a 2009 pickup with a bedliner full of tools. He owned 4 shirts. He had on paper more money than any of them would have believed, and he lived like a man 3 days from payday because part of him had never entirely left that diner on Ashland. And he had a 17-year-old daughter who 3 months earlier had done something he still hadn't decided how to feel about. Emma Carter had applied for a job at the downtown location under her mother's maiden name. She'd done it without telling him. She'd interviewed, gotten hired as a busser at $11.50 an hour, and worked 3 months in a black apron in her own family's restaurant, and nobody there knew. When she finally told him at their kitchen table with the guilty defiance of a 17-year-old who has decided she's right, her explanation was this: "You always say people show you who they are when they don't know who's watching. Well, they don't know who I am either. And Dad, you're not seeing it anymore. You walk in and you fix the ice machine and everybody's lovely to you. I'm in the back. I see the real thing. Daniel had been angry for about 90 seconds and impressed for the rest of the night. For 3 months, Emma had been telling him things. Small things at first, a new scoring sheet at the host stand. A rule about which sections got priority guests. A trainer telling her not to bother running water to table 22 because they're not spending anything anyway. And Daniel, and this is the part he would not forgive himself for later. And the reason his voice does something when he tells it, Daniel had been busy. 3 locations, a franchise conversation, a regional structure he'd built specifically so he wouldn't have to be in every room. He'd said, "I'll look into it, Em." He'd said it more than once. 2 weeks before the Tuesday, Emma had stopped telling him things and started keeping notes instead. And at 7:40 that Tuesday morning, she'd sent him one text message, which was the reason he was standing in the doorway of his own restaurant at 11:40 with a card in his wallet. "Dad, come to downtown today, 11:40. Don't call ahead and don't tell anybody, not even Miguel. Just come and stand by the door and don't say who you are. Please, I need you to see it and not be told about it." There was a second reason Daniel picked that Tuesday, and it's the clock. At 3 o'clock that afternoon in a conference room 9 blocks north, Daniel Carter was scheduled to sign a franchise development agreement, a deal that would take the 3 Carter's Grill locations and turn them into the first 12 of 40 in 4 states over 6 years. He would keep the name a minority stake and a seat on an advisory board. He would hand over operations completely. He was going to sign it. That's the thing to understand. He'd been going to sign it for 4 months. I was tired in a way that 43-year-olds who have spent 11 years not sleeping get tired, and the pitch had been made to him in exactly the language that works on a man like that. This is how the thing you built outlives you. 40 restaurants. The house rule on 40 walls. Sarah's card photocopied 400 times. The group buying in had already installed their operating template at the downtown location as a pilot 6 months earlier as a condition of the deal. Daniel had approved it by email. He had approved it, if he's honest, without reading all of it on a Sunday on his phone between 2 other things, and that fact would sit in his chest like a stone for the rest of his life. The template had a name. It was called the Guest Quality Index. Whitney Rask was the district manager who ran it, and she was very good at her job, and that is the whole problem. She was 36 sharp, relentlessly organized, and she had been brought in by the franchise group specifically because she could take an emotional legacy brand, her phrase used in a deck in front of Daniel, who had not liked it, and had said nothing, and make its unit economics defensible. Whitney's central insight was not stupid. It was in fact mostly true, which is what made it dangerous. She had noticed that at Carter's Grill, the same square footage produced wildly different revenue depending on who sat in it, and that the restaurant's staff, trained for a decade in a culture of everybody sits down, made no distinction whatsoever between a 4-top that would spend $200 in 50 minutes and a 4-top that would spend $19.90. So she built a system to make them distinguish. The Guest Quality Index was a 1 to 5 score. The host assigned it at the door in about a second and a half based on a visual assessment, party composition, apparent occasion, presentation, and the score determined seating priority and section. 4s and 5s got the window, the booths, the fast turns. 1s and 2s got the back, or got told there was a wait, or got a to-go menu handed to them with a smile. It was never written down that way, of course. The training deck said guest experience calibration. The scoring rubric used words like anticipated dining occasion and service intensity match. Nowhere in 71 slides did it say look at their shoes and decide. But the metric it fed was extremely specific: average check per cover tracked weekly per host on a leaderboard in the back office. And the host's quarterly bonus and Whitney's and the assistant managers moved with that number. You do not have to tell a 22-year-old to be cruel. You just have to grade her on it and post the scores. The person actually running the floor day to day was Devin Marsh, the assistant general manager, 29, and Devin was not a villain either in the way that the hand is not the gun. Devin wanted the GM job at the new North Side location. Whitney had told him it was between him and one other guy, and that GQI adoption at downtown was the thing being measured. So Devin implemented the hell out of it. He coached the hosts, he put the leaderboard up, and when Miguel Ocampo, the senior server, 11 years at Carter's, one of the 4 people in the building who knew exactly who the maintenance guy named Dan, was pushed back and said, "This isn't how we do it here." Devin cut his sections and moved him to the back station, and everyone on that floor understood the message perfectly. Which brings us to Kelsey Rhodes, who was 22 years old, 4 months into the job, and about to become the most hated hostess on the internet for approximately 9 days. Kelsey was not cruel. That is genuinely, verifiably true, and it makes the story worse, not better. She was a kid who had been handed a laminated rubric, told that her scores were posted weekly, watched a senior server get his shifts gutted for arguing, and correctly understood what would happen to her if her average check per cover was at the bottom of the board on Friday. She had been at the top of the board for 3 weeks running. She had gotten there by learning very quickly to look at people and decide. 11:40 a.m. Daniel Carter walked into his own restaurant and stood by the door for 4 minutes without anyone speaking to him. I wasn't waiting to be greeted. He was reading the room the way he'd read 100 rooms. The place looked good, and that was the first thing that unsettled him. Clean glass, music at the right volume, servers moving with purpose. On any inspection checklist he'd ever built, downtown would have scored a 94. At 11:52, he looked at the kitchen doorway. The frame was there. The nail was there. There was a rectangle on the paint, slightly less faded than the wall around it, about 3 inches by 5. Daniel looked at that rectangle for a long moment, and something in his chest went very quiet and very cold, and he did not know yet that the card was in a drawer in the back office because a district manager had walked past it in month 1 and said without malice, "Let's swap this for the values poster. It's a little folksy for the new brand standard." 11:56 a.m. He went to the host stand. Kelsey Rhodes looked up with the good smile, the real one, the one she'd had before this job, and said, "High table for one." "If you've got one," Daniel said, and then he watched her do it. It took about a second and a half, and he could see every part of it happen. Her eyes went to the shirt, faded navy, the collar gone soft. To the boots, which were work boots with actual work on them. Out the window, to the 2009 pickup with the tool bed. Back to his hands. Something recalculated behind her face. The smile stayed on but disconnected from whatever was underneath it. She glanced down at the tablet on the stand, and Daniel, who was closer than she thought, and who had built the software's original seating map himself, watched her thumb tap a 2. "Oh," Kelsey said with real practiced regret. "We're fully booked right now. I'm so sorry." Daniel looked past her at the dining room. There were 6 empty tables, 2 two-tops by the window, a booth, 3 four-tops in the middle section set waiting empty. "What about those?" he said, gently. Not a challenge, a question. She didn't look. That was the detail he kept coming back to afterward. She did not turn her head. "Those are all reserved. Every one of them." "Everyone," Kelsey said. "We do a lot of business bookings at lunch, but we've got the counter if you don't mind waiting maybe 45 minutes. She said it kindly. She thought she was being kind. She had in her own mind just handled a 2 with grace. "Sure," Daniel said. "I'll wait." He stepped back from the stand and stood by the window, and he was aware distantly that his hands were not entirely steady, and that the feeling in his chest was not anger yet. At 11:58, a silver SUV pulled up out front. 11:59 a.m. 3 men came through the door, mid-40s, good suits, one of them still on a call, the kind of confidence that fills a doorway. Kelsey's whole body changed. She came around the stand. "Gentlemen, welcome in." No tablet, no booking name, no pause at all. She walked them across the room and seated them at one of the middle four-tops, one of the tables that was 40 seconds earlier reserved, and pulled out a chair for the man on the phone and told them Miguel would be right over and that the short rib was extraordinary today. Daniel timed it. 11 seconds from door to seated. He'd been standing there for 19 minutes. That was rung one, and he took it, standing perfectly still by a window with his hands in his pockets, and he did not say a word because his daughter had told him to come and see it, and he had decided he was going to see all of it. 12:09 p.m. Rung 2. An elderly woman came in slowly with a cane. Small, silver-haired, careful, in a good coat that was maybe 15 years old. She had the particular dignity of someone who is dressed properly to go out to lunch alone. "Hello, dear," she said to Kelsey. "Do you have a little table just for one?" Kelsey's sigh was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was tired, the sigh of a person being asked something unreasonable for the 10th time. Daniel watched her thumb hit 1 on the tablet. "We're really slammed right now, ma'am." The woman glanced at the empty two-top by the window. She had been coming to restaurants for 70 years. She knew exactly what she was looking at. "Oh," she said, "I understand." And she started to turn, and the way she said "I understand" like a woman folding a napkin she'd already used did something to Daniel Carter that 10 years of 18-hour days had not. He stepped forward. "Ma'am," she looked back. "Take my place," Daniel said. "I've been waiting a while, so I'm next up. It's yours." She smiled, and it was a sad smile because she'd worked out the arithmetic faster than the 22-year-old had. "But then you won't have one." "Exactly," Daniel said. The old woman laughed, one soft syllable surprised out of her, and she looked at him for a second the way people look at each other when both of them know precisely what just happened, and neither of them is going to say it. Her name, it turned out later, was Ida Pham. She'd been coming to the Ashland location since it was a diner. She had in a drawer at home a photograph of herself standing next to a food truck in 2015. She did not recognize Daniel. But near the back station, a server named Miguel Ocampo froze with 4 plates on his arm because he did. 12:14 p.m. Miguel came around the end of the bar fast, and his face was doing something complicated. "Mr. Carr." Daniel raised one finger, barely moved it. An inch off the hip, not even a gesture the smallest no a man can make. Miguel stopped. He looked at the host stand. He looked back at Daniel, and a thing passed between them and Miguel Ocampo, who had been at Carter's Grill for 11 years, who had been at the food truck, who had once been given a 2-week advance in cash when his mother was sick and had never once been asked to pay it back, understood that he was being asked to stand there and let it keep happening. His jaw worked. "How long?" he said quietly. "Long enough to see it," Daniel said. Then Miguel said the thing that changed the temperature of the whole afternoon. "Sir, it's not her." He tilted his head 1 degree toward the office door in the back. "It's the sheet. 12:19 p.m. Rung 3, and this one Daniel had not expected because it happened to Miguel. A family of 4 had been standing at the stand for 4 minutes, a dad in a Bears hoodie, a mom, 2 kids under 10, and Kelsey had told them 25 minutes. Miguel, who had 2 open tables in his own section and 11 years of muscle memory, walked over and started to bring them in. Devin Marsh came out of the back like he'd been watching a camera, which he had. He did not shout. Daniel wanted later to be able to say the guy shouted. It would have been cleaner. Devin walked up and stood a half step too close and said at exactly the volume that carries to 4 tables. "Miguel, host seats. That's the whole job. You want to run the door, you can put in for the door." A beat. "You're at the bottom on covers again this week, man. Maybe let's fix that before we start freelancing." The family in the Bears hoodie heard all of it. The dad looked at the floor. They left before Miguel could get back to them. The little boy said something to his mother on the way out, and she said, "Another time, buddy," in the voice parents use. Miguel stood there with a rag in his hand, 48 years old, publicly reduced in the restaurant where his portrait had hung on opening night. And he did not look at Daniel, because if he had looked at Daniel, he would not have been able to stay quiet. Daniel had now been standing by the window for 39 minutes. He had in that time watched his own restaurant refuse him. Refuse an 81-year-old woman, humiliate his oldest employee, and lose a family with 2 kids over a table that stayed empty the entire time. And he still had not seen the worst part. 12:38 p.m., rung 4. The one the whole story turns on. A woman came in with 2 kids, late 20s, hair up, in a clipwork polo from a grocery chain with the name tag still clipped on. She'd come straight off a shift. The girl was maybe 6 and had a library book under her arm. The boy was 4 and was doing the specific thing 4-year-olds do when they're past hungry and into tired, which is to lean his entire body weight against his mother's leg like gravity had been increased just for him. Her name was Tessa Nolan. Her bus was at 1:05. "Hi," she said to Kelsey. Could we maybe sit by the window? He likes watching the trains." She nodded at the boy. Kelsey looked at them, and Daniel watched her thumb hit 1. "The window's reserved, unfortunately." Tessa nodded quick, the nod of a person who has been told no in a lot of rooms and has learned not to make it awkward for the other person. "That's okay. Anywhere's fine. It'll be about 20 minutes. "Oh." Tessa glanced at the clock over the pass. Then she did the math out loud, which is a thing people only do when they're too tired to perform. "We've got a bus at 1:05, so..." She stopped herself, started over, smiled. "Actually, can I ask, is it okay if the kids share one plate, the chicken plate? They can't finish a whole one each, and a tiny hitch. The smallest possible amount of shame allowed into a sentence. It's just easier." And Kelsey Rhodes, 22 years old, with her name at the top of a leaderboard in a back office, said, "I'm sorry, restaurant policy doesn't allow that." Daniel Carter, 8 feet away, stopped breathing. Because there was no such policy. There had never been such a policy. There was a policy, and it was the opposite, and it was written on a 3x5 index card in blue ballpoint by a woman who had been dead for 11 years, and it had hung by the kitchen door until somebody decided it was too folksy for the new brand standard. He had the photocopy in his wallet. He could feel it against his hip. "Oh," Tessa said. "Okay, sorry. Thank you anyway." She turned to go. She got the boy's hand. And the boy, who was 4 and who had been in a stroller and then a bus and then a grocery store break room since 7 that morning, said the 4 words at exactly the volume a 4-year-old says everything: "Mommy, I'm still hungry." 12:41 p.m. The lunch rush kept going. That's the thing about real rooms, nothing goes quiet the way it does in movies. Somebody's silverware hit a plate. The bar blender ran. The 3 men at the middle 4 top laughed at something. And a man in a faded navy shirt walked away from the window and crossed the floor toward the host stand, and the 4 people in that building who knew who he was, Miguel at the back station, and a 17-year-old busser in a black apron who had just come out of the kitchen with a tub in her arms and had gone absolutely still, all understood at the same instant that the afternoon had just ended. "Ma'am," Daniel's voice to Tessa at the door, not loud. "Would you give me 30 seconds before you go?" Tessa turned wary the way you turn when a stranger addresses you in a restaurant with your kids. "You're fine," he said. 30 seconds. Kelsey looked up, annoyed now. "Sir, if you're still waiting for a table, I told you. I'm not waiting anymore." Devin Marsh appeared at Kelsey's shoulder the way managers do. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes," Daniel said. "I'll seat them." Devin's face did the thing, the little tightening. "Sir, I appreciate the concern, but we've got to wait, and I'm not sure who you are to be telling my staff." Daniel reached into his back pocket, took out a worn brown leather wallet, and set 2 things on the host stand. The first was a small silver key. It was old and it was scratched, and stamped into the head of it was the Carter's Grill logo, the one from the food truck, the original, the one with the little fork through the C. There were 4 of them in existence, one for each location and one that had opened the truck. The second was a laminated 3x5 index card, soft at the corners, from 11 years in a wallet with 6 lines on it in blue ballpoint. Devin Marsh looked at the key, and Daniel watched a 29-year-old man's entire nervous system arrive at a conclusion about 4 seconds before his mouth could catch up. "Oh," Devin said. Kelsey was still confused. What is that?" Devin didn't answer her. He'd gone the color of the tablecloth. Miguel Ocampo set down his tray, walked out from behind the back station in front of the whole dining room, and said clearly and with 11 years of something in it, "That's Mr. Carter. He owns it. He built it." The word went across that floor like a dropped glass. "Owner. That's the owner. Oh my God, that's the owner." Kelsey Rhodes turned around and looked at the man she had told 90 minutes earlier that there were no tables. And Daniel Carter did not look at her at all. He picked up the index card, walked past the host stand, and put it back on the nail by the kitchen door where the rectangle in the paint was. Then he turned around and faced the room. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he said to Tessa Nolan. "Give me 1 minute and I'll explain." Then to the floor. "My name's Daniel Carter. This is my restaurant. I've been standing by that window since 11:40 and nobody's seated me, and that's fine. That's not why I'm talking." He nodded at the card on the wall. "That's why I'm talking. My wife wrote that in a hospital bed 11 years ago. 6 lines. No one gets a smaller welcome than the person before them. It hung on that nail from the day we opened until somebody decided it didn't fit the new brand standard." He looked at Devin. "How long's it been down?" Devin's mouth opened. Nothing came out for a second. About 5 months." 5 months. Daniel absorbed that. "Okay." He turned to Kelsey. And this is the part every person in that room described the same way afterward. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed, and it was so much worse because rage you can push back on and disappointment just sits on you. "You told that woman her kids couldn't share a plate." Kelsey's hands were shaking so hard she'd put them behind her back. That's the I was told. There's no such policy. There has never been such a policy. There is a policy and it's 4 feet behind you and it says everybody eats." He paused. "Do you know why it says that?" She shook her head. She was crying now silently, the way you cry when you're 22 and something enormous is happening and you don't get to leave the room. "Because 11 years ago I was in a diner on Ashland with $4 and I ordered 1 plate and told my kid I wasn't hungry." He said it plainly, no theater. "And she was 6 and she pushed half of it back across the table to me. And a waitress I never got the name of brought me a second plate and told me the kitchen made a mistake, and that woman is the reason there's a Carter's Grill at all. Every one of these tables is standing on top of a burger some stranger bought a broke guy in 2014. Tessa Nolan at the door had her hand over her mouth. "So when I say everybody eats," Daniel said, "I'm not being sentimental, I'm being literal. That's the entire business. That's the only competitive advantage this place has ever had." He looked at the room, his room 340 covers a day, 11 years all of it. Today wasn't a failure because somebody made a mistake. Mistakes are Tuesday. Today was a failure because kindness got taken off the wall and nobody in this building noticed for 5 months. Then he walked over to Tessa Nolan and he pulled out a chair at the 2-top by the window, the reserved one, the empty one, the one the boy could watch the trains from, and he seated her himself. He got the boy's booster from the stack. He knelt down next to the girl with the library book. "What's your name?" "June." "June, that's a great name. You get whatever you want, your brother too. 2 whole plates, and if you can't finish them, that's completely fine. That's what boxes are for." The boy's eyes went enormous. "Anything. Anything," Daniel said. "It's my restaurant, I checked." June laughed. Tessa Nolan put her face in her hands and cried at a table by the window in front of 40 strangers, and at least 6 of them were recording, and one of those videos would be seen 4 million times inside of a week. But the story was not over. It had in fact barely started because Daniel Carter turned back around and said the sentence that took the whole thing from a nice moment to an earthquake. "Now," he said, "somebody show me the sheet." 1:04 p.m. Devin Marsh had exactly 1 job in the next 90 seconds, and he blew it in the first 10, which is how you know he'd been the hand and never the head. "There's no sheet, sir. I don't know what Miguel..." "Devin," Daniel's voice was almost gentle. "There's a laminated rubric at the host stand. I can see the corner of it under the tablet. I've been looking at it for an hour." Kelsey Rhodes, 22, crying at the bottom of the worst afternoon of her life, reached under the tablet and pulled it out and handed it to Daniel Carter with both hands, and that act, more than anything else she did that day, is why she still has a career. It was a 1-page card. Guest experience calibration quick score. A 1 to 5 scale. Bullet points on visual assessment. Party presentation. Anticipated dining occasion. Service intensity match. And on the back, the part that mattered, scores 1 to 2 standard queue back sections. Scores 4 to 5 priority seating window booth. Daniel read it twice. "Who wrote this?" "It's district," Kelsey said before Devin could get in front of it. "It's we get scored on it. Average check per cover. It's posted in the back on Fridays. She stopped, started again, and her voice cracked all the way through. I'm number one. I've been number one for 3 weeks. That's how I got number one. And Devin Marsh, standing next to a 22-year-old who had just told the truth, made his choice. That's okay. That's an interpretation issue, he said fast to Daniel. That's not what the rubric says. That's how she read it. I coach the tool as written. If Kelsey's applying it that way, that's a training gap on her end. And honestly, I've had concerns about her judgment. Devin, Miguel Ocampo from 6 feet away. You cut my sections in April for seating a 4-top with kids in it. You said, and I quote, "You're killing my averages." I never... You said it in the walk-in. Rico was there. Tanya was there. I said, you said it in the walk-in, Devin. And that was the first crack, the hand turning on the head turning on the kid, everybody in that back office ecosystem reaching for the nearest body to stand behind. It was, Daniel would say later, the single most educational 90 seconds of his 11 years in business, because he finally got to watch what his own operating structure did when you turned the lights on. Then the front door opened, 1:11 p.m. Whitney Rask walked into Carter's Grill downtown. Devin had texted to her at 12:47 3 words, "Owner is here," and she had come 9 blocks in a car and arrived with her jacket still open and a smile already assembled. Daniel, bright, warm, hand out. "Nobody told me you were doing a visit today. I'd have..." Whitney. He didn't take the hand. He held up the laminated card. "Is this yours?" She looked at it for 1 full second, and Daniel watched a very smart person run a very fast decision tree and pick the branch that ended her. "That's the calibration tool, yes. That's a standard hospitality optimization instrument. It's used across the industry. Your host just told me she scores people at the door by looking at them, and that 1s and 2s get told there's a wait and that her bonus moves with it. That's a misapplication." "Is it?" Daniel turned the card over and read the back out loud to the room in a completely flat voice. "Scores 1 to 2 standard queue-back sections. Scores 4 to 5 priority seating window/booth." He looked up. "What part of that is a misapplication, Whitney?" "That's not a misapplication. That's an instruction." Whitney Rask's smile did not go away. That's the thing about her. It stayed exactly where it was, and she pivoted into the register she'd used in 100 rooms, brisk and slightly impatient, the tone of an adult explaining margin to a hobbyist. "Daniel, with respect, you brought us in for a reason. This location's average check was flat for 2 years. Covers per hour were below every comp in the market. I raised average check 11% in 5 months and turn time by 9 minutes, and those are the numbers that make 40 restaurants possible instead of 3. A small shrug. "You wanted scale. Scale is arithmetic. It requires you to be honest that a 4-top spending $19 over 90 minutes is not the same asset as a 4-top spending $200 over 50, and every operator on earth knows that, and most of them just don't write it down. I wrote it down. That's the only difference between me and the people you'd rather work with." The room was silent now, actually silent, even the bar. "And the card," Daniel said. "By the kitchen. Where is it?" Whitney blinked. "The what card?" "Index card, blue pen in a $5 frame. It was on that nail for 11 years and it's been gone 5 months. I have no idea what you're..." And then she did know. He watched it land, and she recovered in half a second and said the sentence. She said it in front of Miguel Ocampo and Kelsey Rhodes and Devin Marsh and 11 customers and Tessa Nolan at the window with 2 kids and a plate of chicken and at least 3 phones that were recording, and a 17-year-old girl in a black apron standing by the kitchen door with a bus tub in her arms. "Oh, the handwriting thing." Whitney Rask waved 2 fingers. "Daniel, that was clutter. It's a scrap of paper. It doesn't scale." 1 to 13 p.m. Nobody said anything for about 4 seconds. Then a busser walked out of the kitchen, set her tub down on an empty table, took a folded piece of paper out of her apron and put it in Daniel Carter's hand. "Dad," Emma said. "This one's the original directive. Devin told Rico to shred everything from the November rollout on Friday. I took it out of the bin on Thursday night." Whitney Rask turned and looked at the 17-year-old busser who had just said "Dad," and for the first time all afternoon her face did something she hadn't planned. The paper was an internal email printed with a scoring rubric attached. It was from Whitney Rask to Devin Marsh, and 2 other unit managers dated the previous November. Daniel read it in front of everyone. The relevant sentence was, "Coach hosts to protect window booth inventory for high GQI parties. Low GQI parties should be quoted a wait even where inventory exists. The goal is voluntary attrition, not confrontation." Voluntary attrition. Daniel Carter read those 2 words out loud twice. "That's what you called it," he said. "When a woman with 2 kids gets told there's a 20-minute wait at an empty table so she'll leave on her own and you never have to be the one who says no. You built a system so nobody in this building would ever have to feel like they did something wrong." He looked at Kelsey. "She's been carrying it for you for 5 months and she's 22. And Whitney Rask, who had 1 exit left, 1 door marked, 'I'm sorry I got this badly wrong,' did not take it. Every restaurant group in this city runs some version of that," she said. "I'm the only one who documented it. If that's a firing offense, you're going to have a very hard time staffing 40 units. I'm not staffing 40 units, Daniel said. I took out his phone and called the number he'd been going to call at 3 o'clock and said 11 words into it in front of the entire room. It's Carter. I'm not signing today or any other day. Whitney Rask was gone within the week, and the interesting thing is that Daniel Carter did not have to do it. The franchise group did it quickly, cleanly, and without sentiment, the moment a 9-minute video of a district manager calling a dead woman's handwriting a scrap of paper that doesn't scale went from 4 million views to 14. She had not broken a law. That's the part people found hardest to accept, and the part that matters most. Nothing in the guest quality index was illegal, and a competent attorney could argue every line of it as ordinary yield management. What ended her was that she'd written down in a company email a plan to make poor customers leave on their own, and had used the phrase voluntary attrition to describe a woman with a 4-year-old. She has never publicly apologized. In her only statement given to a trade publication 4 months later, she said the tool had been misunderstood by people with no P&L responsibility, which is word for word. The disease stated as a defense. She consults now for restaurant groups on unit economics. She is reportedly very good at it. Kelsey Rhodes was not fired, and that decision cost Daniel 3 days and 1 fight with his own daughter. Emma wanted her gone. Emma had watched her do it for 3 months. Daniel's argument was this: she handed me the sheet when she had every reason to hide it, when Devin was already turning on her, a 22-year-old with rent to pay, pulled the rubric out from under the tablet and put it in the owner's hands and told him she was number 1 on the board and how she'd gotten there. I'm not going to build a company where the only person who told the truth is the only person who loses her job, Daniel said. Kelsey was suspended 2 weeks unpaid and required this was her own idea, offered in a meeting where she cried through most of it, to work 6 months of Saturday lunches at the Ashland location under Miguel Ocampo. She's a general manager now at the Northside location that Devin Marsh wanted. There is a laminated card at her host stand. It is not a scoring rubric. It has 6 lines on it in blue ballpoint. Miguel Ocampo got the thing he'd never asked for in 11 years. When Daniel killed the franchise deal, he also killed the district manager layer that had produced it, and he replaced it with a role he invented in a diner booth over 2 days with a legal pad of floor authority above unit management, whose entire job is that any employee at any level can refuse an instruction they believe violates the house rule and cannot be scheduled down, sectioned down, or written up for it. He offered it to Miguel. Miguel said no twice. He was a server. He said not a suit. And took it on the third ask on one condition: that he'd keep 2 shifts a week on the floor because you can't protect a room you don't stand in. Every new hire at all 3 locations now spends their first 30 minutes with him, and it is not a slideshow. It's Miguel in an apron telling them about a Tuesday. The rest resolve fast and without ceremony. Devin Marsh was terminated for the shredding, not the seating the sheet. He'd have been coached through the destruction of records during an owner walkthrough he could not survive. He had spent 5 months implementing someone else's system perfectly in the hope of a promotion, and got instead the one thing nobody ever wants to be handed, which is sole possession of a document nobody else's name was on. Ida Pham eats at the window table on Tuesdays. It's got a small brass plate on it now, which embarrasses her enormously. And Tessa Nolan, who did not want a job, a check, or a viral moment, and who was frankly a little annoyed by all 3, accepted exactly one thing: a standing tab for her kids at any Carter's Grill ever, no questions. She's used it 11 times in 2 years. June, who is 8 now, has read most of the way through the specials board. There is one more thing, and Daniel Carter had been carrying it unopened for 11 years. Sarah wrote 2 cards that afternoon in the hospital. He'd only ever told one person about the second one, and that person was 17 and had been born 3 years before it was written. The second card came in a small sealed envelope, and on the front of the envelope, Sarah had written in the same blue pen, "Open this on the day you're thinking about letting it go." He'd almost opened it a dozen times. The year the diner nearly closed. The night the food truck's transmission died. The morning he signed the lease on downtown and threw up in the alley behind it. Every time he'd decided he wasn't there yet and put it back in the drawer. At 2:40 that Tuesday, 20 minutes before he would have been sitting in a conference room 9 blocks north, signing his name, Daniel Carter sat in his truck in the alley behind his own restaurant and opened it, because he had never in his life been closer to letting it go than he was that morning. The card said, "If you're reading this, you're tired, and you're thinking about handing it to somebody with more energy than you. Do it if you need to. I mean that. But check one thing first. Go stand by the door for an hour and don't tell them who you are. Then look at the wall by the kitchen and see if my card's still up. If it's up, sell it. They'll be fine. It was never the building. It was the rule, and the rule survived you. If it's down, then whoever you're handing it to already took it down, and they'll take everything else too, and you'll spend the rest of your life explaining to Emma why the thing with our name on it stopped being ours. Don't sell a promise, Danny. You can only keep one or break one." SC Daniel Carter sat in a parked truck in an alley and read it 4 times. Emma found him there at 10 to 3. She got in on the passenger side without saying anything, the way she'd been getting into that truck since she was 6, and read it over his shoulder, and then neither of them said anything for a while. She knew, Emma said finally. 11 years ago, she knew exactly what would happen. She didn't know what would happen, Daniel said. She knew what to check. He folded it, put it in the wallet next to the other one. Dad, Emma was looking out the windshield. I sent that text at 7:40 this morning. If I'd sent it Thursday, I'd have signed on Thursday, Daniel said. Yeah. So you saved it, kid. He started the truck. Your mom wrote the rule. You're the one who made me go read it. Meta ending. All right, let's be honest with each other. Daniel Carter isn't real. Neither is Whitney Rask or Carter's Grill or a 3x5 index card in blue ballpoint. But the guest quality index is real. Not by that name, by 100 names in 1,000 buildings right now. Somewhere today, a host, a receptionist, a sales rep, a leasing agent, a bank teller, a car salesman is looking at a person walking through a door and assigning them a number in a second and a half. Sometimes it's on a laminated card. Usually it isn't. Usually it's just in the air, unwritten, absorbed, the thing everybody knows and nobody says. And the score decides how long you wait, which table you get, whether the thing you asked for is available or reserved. And here's what I want you to notice about this story, because it's the part that isn't comfortable. The villain wasn't the 22-year-old at the door. Kelsey Rhodes wasn't cruel, she was graded. Somebody built a system that paid her to look at a woman in a grocery store polo and decide, and then posted the scores on Friday so she'd know how she was doing. She was the hand. She was always the hand. And the person who wrote the system. She never once thought of herself as a bad person. She thought she was the only honest one in the room, the only operator willing to write down what everybody already does. And she was almost right. And that's exactly why it worked for 5 months in a building where the owner's own dead wife had nailed the answer to the wall. The truth is, the card came down in month 1. And nobody, not the servers, not the managers, not the owner who'd been in that building a dozen times to fix the ice machine, noticed for 5 months. So the real question this story is asking isn't, would you have seated her? Of course you'd say yes. Everybody says yes. It's this, what's already come down off the wall where you work, and how long has it been gone before anybody said anything, because nobody ever announces it. They just take it down on a Tuesday and call it clutter and wait to see if you notice. Tell me down in the comments. Be honest, I read them. And if you've ever walked into a room and felt somebody assign you a number, the shoes, the car, the accent, the name type, same welcome. Below and go see how many people are standing at that door with you. It's more than you think. It always is. If this one landed, hit like so it reaches the next person who's about to be told. There's a wait at an empty table, and subscribe. There's a new one every week. Take care of each other out there. And go look at your wall. End.